At the headquarters of a billion-dollar tech, a poised black woman arrives for what should be a high-stakes investment meeting. Instead of respect, she's forced to wait, dismissed to a side chair and spoken to like a child. The CEO even smirks that he doesn't shake hands with staff. What no one in that room realizes is that she isn't there to impress them. She's there to measure them. And with a single word to her team, the company's empire begins to crack. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. The parking lot shimmered with the heat of a Texas morning, a line of black sedans and gleaming SUVs reflecting the sun like polished armor. A few employees in pressed suits hurried toward the revolving doors, clutching tablets, coffee cups or both, their badges swinging on branded lanyards. Amid them, a modest dark blue sedan slid into a corner space. When the driver's door opened, Amara Cole stepped out with deliberate ease. She smoothed the sleeve of her tailored jacket and paused for a moment to study the glass and steel tower of Novodyne Technologies. The headquarters rose like a monument to success, all reflective surfaces and sharp lines, designed to impress at first glance. For Amara, it was less a symbol of ambition than a question mark. Could a company rumored for arrogance and toxicity ever deserve the capital her firm might unleash? Her purpose here was simple yet profound. Cole Hartwell Capital, the investment firm she had built from the ground up, had the resources to alter a company's trajectory overnight. $2 billion sat ready, waiting for her assessment. To those inside this tower, she might look like another visitor, perhaps staff or a candidate for an administrative role. The truth, her truth was far heavier. She carried with her not only financial power but the lived weight of decades spent navigating boardrooms where her competence was doubted before she spoke a single word. Today was not just about numbers, it was about culture, about testing whether Novodyne's polished exterior concealed the rot of old habits. Inside, the lobby breathed efficiency. High ceilings, gleaming floors, walls adorned with oversized digital screens showcasing product launches and community initiatives. A receptionist behind the sleek marble desk greeted a pair of white men in fitted suits with a warm smile, ushering them toward the plush lounge area where coffee service waited on low tables. Then her eyes lifted to Amara. The smile faltered, not vanishing but thinning, reshaped into a perfunctory expression. Her gaze flicked from Amara's dark skin to the leather portfolio she carried, as if recalibrating assumptions in real time. "Good morning," Amara said evenly. "I'm here for my 10 o'clock with Mr. Hawthorne." The receptionist, her badge read Jenna Park, tilted her head, one brow lifting almost imperceptibly. "Administrative applicants are on the 3rd floor. HR can assist you there." The tone was soft but laced with disbelief, the way one might redirect someone who had clearly lost their way. Amara held Jenna's gaze, her own voice calm but firm. "I have an appointment with Mr. Hawthorne directly. Please check under the name Amara Cole." She placed her portfolio lightly on the counter, the gesture controlled, unhurried. Jenna's fingers tapped across the screen. Skepticism shadowed her face as she read. "Oh, please wait, over there." Her hand motioned not toward the lounge where the suited men had disappeared, but to a side seating section with straight-backed chairs and no refreshments. Amara offered no protest. She simply inclined her head and walked to the indicated space, lowering herself into the chair with composed grace. She did not miss the subtle hierarchy at play: the coffee, the plush seats, the smiles reserved for certain guests. Nor did she ignore the sidelong glances from employees passing by, their eyes lingering on her skin before sliding away with whispers half muffled. She had seen it before, every assumption, every unspoken question. Who is she really? What is she doing here? She let it wash over her, each detail quietly noted. The clock's hands crawled forward. 10 minutes became 20, then 45. Across the lobby, another visitor was escorted promptly upstairs, his handshake met with easy laughter from the receptionist. Amara remained where she was, portfolio balanced on her knees, legs crossed at the ankle. Her face revealed nothing but patience, though inside she recognized the tactic with precision. Delays were never neutral, they were signals, a language of power. "You will wait for us. You are not important enough for punctuality." At last, a young man in a slim gray suit approached, tablet in hand. "Miss Cole, I'm Elliot Barnes, Mr. Hawthorne's assistant." This way, please." His voice was polite but rushed, as if already apologizing for her wasted time without daring to say so directly. He did not lead her into the spacious executive boardroom she had expected, but into a narrow, windowless meeting room, its air stale, its table too small. It was a downgrade, dressed as accommodation. When she entered, Richard Hawthorne did not rise. The CEO of Novodyne sat at the head of the table, his phone in hand, thumb scrolling without pause. He gestured vaguely toward a chair across from him, eyes still fixed on the glowing screen. 3 other men occupied the table, each in variations of the same gray suit, their postures relaxed, expressions unreadable, but tinged with condescension. Amara seated herself with deliberate composure. She folded her hands on the portfolio, waiting until Richard finally set the phone aside and glanced up at her. His eyes flicked over her once, quick as a transaction, his lips curving into a thin smile that carried no warmth. "So," he said, his tone flat, almost weary, "you're here about some diversity initiative." He leaned back in his chair as he spoke, the words carrying the weight of obligation rather than welcome, as though she were an item on a checklist rather than a peer across the table. Amara's pulse beat steady, though she felt the familiar sting beneath her calm exterior. She had been here before too many times, assessed, diminished, categorized before she had uttered a word. Yet her reply came smooth, even, unshaken. "I'm here to discuss potential investment opportunities," she clarified. Her voice remained conversational, not a hint sharper than it needed to be. Richard's brows lifted slightly, skepticism flickering across his face before he masked it with a smirk. Around the table, one of the executives exchanged a knowing glance with another, the corners of his mouth tugging upward in quiet amusement. They thought they understood who she was, they thought they had her figured out. What they did not know, what they could not yet imagine, was that every slight, every assumption was being catalogued, measured, and stored. For Amara, this was not just another meeting, it was the opening act of a test they had already begun to fail. And she intended to see exactly how far they would take it before revealing who, in fact, was truly in control. The small conference room smelled faintly of stale coffee, its fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. On the wall, a generic framed print of an abstract landscape seemed almost mocking in its blandness. Richard Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, clicking a remote that advanced a slide deck on the wall screen. The images were almost cartoonish, bright graphics, oversized arrows, words in cheerful fonts. He spoke with exaggerated slowness, each syllable drawn out as though he were addressing a group of children. "Now," Richard began, his voice pitched half a notch louder than necessary, "this is what we call an algorithm. Think of it as a recipe, like baking. Step by step, you follow instructions, and out comes the result, very simple." His smile flickered toward Amara, condescending. "Are you following so far?" One of the men at the table smirked and leaned sideways to whisper something to his neighbor. The second executive stifled a laugh, covering his mouth as though the effort to contain amusement was painful. The message was clear, they weren't just underestimating her, they found the performance itself entertaining. Amara sat upright, her hands folded neatly over her leather portfolio, her eyes steady, her expression betrayed nothing. Though inside she noted each detail like a careful accountant, every smirk, every word choice, every pause had meaning. When Richard clicked to the next slide, a childlike diagram of a server farm, represented by clipart computers with smiling faces, Amara leaned forward slightly. Her tone remained conversational, but the question cut through the air with surgical precision. "Your prospectus references a proprietary deep learning architecture," she said. "Could you elaborate on how it differs from conventional transformer models, particularly regarding inference latency at scale?" Richard blinked, the rhythm of his presentation derailed. The remote slipped slightly in his hand before he tightened his grip. "Well, it's quite technical," he stammered, darting a glance at his colleagues. "Maybe our CTO could walk through the complicated stuff later." His laugh was forced, brittle. "I wouldn't want to overwhelm you with the jargon." The air shifted, the executives glanced at one another, suddenly less amused but unwilling to intervene. Amara kept her gaze on Richard, her face still composed, though the flicker of satisfaction was almost imperceptible in her eyes. She let the silence linger long enough to register before she spoke again. I'm also curious about the discrepancy in your Q2 filings, she continued smoothly. Your reported R&D expenditure dropped 22% while simultaneously claiming expanded research initiatives. How do those figures reconcile? Richard's smile tightened like a rope pulled too hard. He jabbed the remote, flipping past the financial slides in quick succession. Those are complicated financial matters, he said briskly, his tone edging toward irritation. Probably beyond the scope of our discussion today. We should focus on more appropriate topics. The pause he placed on appropriate dripped with implication. The men beside him shifted in their seats. One tapped his pen against the table, another cleared his throat. Amara's face remained unflinching. She had heard this tone too many times, the dismissal packaged as protection, the subtle reminder of where they believed she belonged. Richard set the remote down abruptly. Let's take a quick break, he announced, his voice rising as if to reassert command. Elliot, get someone to bring coffee. He turned toward Amara with a grin that failed to reach his eyes. How do you take yours? Lots of cream and sugar, I bet. The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading through the room. One executive shifted uncomfortably, another looked down at his notes, but two others smirked openly, complicit. The racist implication hung heavy, daring contradiction. Amara did not flinch. Instead she closed her portfolio with deliberate slowness, the soft thud of leather punctuating the silence. Her gaze met Richard's directly, unwavering. Before we continue, she said calmly, I'd like to see your diversity and inclusion statistics for executive positions. Richard's jaw tightened, his attempt at humor had failed to rattle her, and now she had turned the spotlight on him. He forced a smile. Marcus, he called, raising his voice toward the door, why don't you walk us through our diversity initiatives? The man who entered a moment later was the only person of color Amara had seen in the building above entry level. Marcus Alvarez, Navadine's chief diversity officer, carried himself with practiced professionalism, but there was a weariness in his eyes, the look of someone too often summoned to stand as proof of progress. Navadine is committed to fostering an inclusive environment, Marcus began, his tone rehearsed. Our hiring of underrepresented minorities has increased 8% year over year. He clicked through slides of smiling employees arranged in carefully diverse compositions, stock photo perfect. Amara raised a brow slightly. What's the retention rate for those hires? She asked. Marcus hesitated. I don't have those figures with me, and promotion pathways. She continued, her voice still mild. How many people of color have moved into senior leadership in the past 5 years? Marcus's hand faltered on the clicker. We've implemented mentorship programs that we believe will. Rome wasn't built in a day. Richard cut in, waving a dismissive hand. His voice was sharper now, irritated by her persistence. We're making progress. You can't expect overnight miracles. The door swung open again and 5 more executives entered, their voices booming with laughter. Richard's face lit up, his entire demeanor transformed as he rose from his chair to greet them. Handshakes, backslaps, inside jokes about last weekend's golf outing filled the air, drowning the tension that had preceded them. Amara remained seated, invisible. For 3 full minutes, no one acknowledged her presence. Finally Richard gestured toward her. Gentlemen, this is Amara, he said casually. She's here today to discuss our diversity initiatives. Not Miss Cole, not an investor, just Amara, stripped of title, identity compressed into a single name and an assumed agenda. The executives gave perfunctory nods. 2 avoided eye contact altogether. One, whose nameplate read Graham Porter, leaned toward his colleague and whispered deliberately loud enough to carry. Diversity quota, play along, she'll be gone by lunch. Amara's pen made a tiny mark in her notebook, the only outward sign she had heard. Her posture remained unchanged, her composure intact. She had no intention of reacting to their bait. Every moment was data, every slight another entry in the record she was silently compiling. Richard, smiling broadly now, turned back to her with mock interest. Perhaps you'd like to share your story with the group, he suggested, his tone patronizing. I'm sure everyone would love to hear about your journey. The implication was obvious. Her role in this room was not as an equal, not as a potential source of capital, but as a token expected to entertain with personal narrative. Amara began to speak about market trends instead, her voice steady, her words precise. That's not really what everyone is interested in. Richard interrupted with a forced laugh, waving a hand. We have plenty of financial analysts, what we'd like to hear is your perspective as a... He let the sentence dangle, unfinished but heavy with meaning. The silence that followed was louder than any insult. The laughter from the new arrivals had only just settled when the door opened again, and another man entered the room. He was white, mid-40s, his tailored suit sharper than the others, his watch glinting in the overhead light. Richard's face transformed the instant he saw him. He shot up from his chair, his back straight, hand already extended. "Alan, glad you could join us," he said warmly, gripping the newcomer's hand with both of his. The energy shifted instantly, respect, deference, even relief filled Richard's tone. Then as Alan settled into a seat at the table, Richard turned his gaze back to Amara. His posture changed deliberately, arms folding behind his back, chin raised just slightly. His lips curved into a smile that was half smirk, half sneer. In a voice meant to carry, he announced, "I don't shake hands with staff." The words landed like a slap, echoing across the sterile conference room. Several executives looked away quickly, one adjusted his tie, pretending distraction. Two others smirked openly, enjoying the humiliation. The silence afterward was sharp, painful, heavy enough to press on the chest. Amara didn't flinch. She had been insulted before, in boardrooms, in elevators, in restaurants, where her presence was questioned before she even ordered. But there was something different about this moment, the deliberate cruelty, the theatricality of it. Richard hadn't simply dismissed her. He had made her erasure public, turned it into performance, a show for his colleagues. She let the quiet stretch, refusing to fill it with apology or rebuttal. Her calmness was her refusal to play by his script. Inside, her thoughts clicked into order. This was confirmation, the moment she had anticipated. She didn't feel broken by it, she felt steady, centered, almost cold. Every microaggression, every patronizing smile, every skipped slide, had led here. Now she had the peace she needed. She reached for her phone under the table, her fingers moving with the grace of routine. One word, one command to her CFO: prejudice, execute. Amara stood. "If you'll excuse me," she said evenly, her voice neutral. She didn't explain, didn't ask permission. She stepped toward the door. Richard barely glanced up, already turning back to Alan. Sure, he said dismissively. "Restrooms are down the hall." His tone was that of a boss waving off an intern. The men resumed their conversation, as though she had evaporated, their laughter spilling into the hallway before the door closed behind her. The women's restroom was empty. Amara entered a stall, closed the door, and took 3 slow, measured breaths. They were not breaths of anger but of grounding. Her hand was steady as she dialed. "David," she said softly, when her CFO answered, "initiate phase 1. Both options ready." "Ready," he replied. "Investment package or withdrawal package? Which way are we going?" Start signaling concerns to analysts. Make it look organic, just enough to stir questions. Don't reveal our hand yet, and prepare the documentation file. We've got exactly what we came for. She ended the call, slipped the phone back into her portfolio, and faced her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was calm, her eyes sharp. She smoothed her hair, straightened her jacket, and walked out with the grace of someone who had already decided the outcome. When she returned to the conference room, the atmosphere was subtly altered. Executives were checking their phones, screens displayed market tickers, numbers in red, whispers threaded the air. Richard forced a smile when he saw her. "Nothing to concern yourself with," he said curtly, waving his hand as though batting away a fly. "Just some normal market movement." His voice cracked slightly at the word normal. Amara tilted her head, expression mild. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Not at all," Richard snapped. "Now miss," he hesitated, realizing he had never once spoken her surname. "Listen, I think we've covered everything. We have real business matters to attend to." His emphasis on real was sharp, almost cutting. Amara smiled pleasantly. "Of course, I just need one final meeting with you. Mr. Hawthorne, alone. Then I'll be on my way. Richard exhaled through his nose, irritated but eager to conclude. Fine, he said, rising from his seat. Come to my office. He led her down the hall, not looking back, while his team scrambled to whisper about the sudden dip on their screens. The office was a monument to ego. Trophies lined the shelves, awards, plaques, photographs with governors, senators and celebrities. Framed news articles announcing Novadine's past triumphs covered the walls. Every image carried the same theme. White men in suits congratulating one another. No women, no people of color, no one who looked like Amara. She let her eyes move across the room deliberately, absorbing each piece of evidence. Richard gestured toward a chair across from his desk, impatience sharp in his movements. What is it you want to review? Amara set her portfolio on her lap. Her voice was steady, measured, her words precise. I was kept waiting for 45 minutes, directed to a side seating area, rather than your VIP lounge, presented with explanations of basic concepts as though I were a child. Interrupted repeatedly. Addressed only by my first name. Told my perspective was valuable, only as a token. And finally, refused a handshake with the explicit statement that you don't shake hands with staff. Richard's face darkened. Now hold on. I recorded our entire interaction. Amara continued without raising her voice. Legally, Texas is a one-party consent state. Richard's phone buzzed on the desk. He ignored it. It buzzed again, then again, flagged urgent, shareholders. He glanced down involuntarily, color draining from his face. His free hand twitched toward the phone before he yanked it back, trying to maintain composure. You think you can play lawyer with me? He spat, leaning forward. You come in here, take up my time, and now you threaten me with recordings. You know what your problem is. People like you always want special treatment. You want the boardroom without earning it. You want the handshake without the status. Well, I built this company from nothing, and I don't owe you. His phone buzzed again. He snatched it up, voice lowering but still audible. What do you mean down 3%? There's no news, no announcement, it's just noise, it'll bounce back. A pause. Johnson Capital Partners, never heard of them. Why would, he stopped, eyes flicking to his computer screen. He typed furiously, pulling up search results. Amara sat silently, watching his face. The panic bloomed slowly, then fully, his jaw slackened, eyes widening, as article after article populated the screen. Amara Cole, founder and CEO, Cole Hartwell Capital, over $50 billion in assets under management. Known for pulling investment from companies with toxic cultures. His fingers froze on the keyboard, his breath came faster, shallow. He looked up at her, the smirk gone, the arrogance burned away, replaced by something raw and desperate. Miss Cole, he began, stumbling over the name at last. I believe there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If I had known. No misunderstanding, she interrupted calmly, rising to her feet. You were perfectly clear about who you thought I was. And how you believed that person deserved to be treated. He moved quickly, stepping around the desk, blocking her path to the door. His hands hovered awkwardly, as though he might reach for her arm but thought better of it under her unflinching gaze. His voice was frantic now, pitched higher, stripped of authority. Please, let's discuss this in private. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits us both. You don't want to ruin us over a little misstep. The commotion drew attention from the hall. Employees slowed, eyes darting into the office. A phone was lifted discreetly, camera catching Richard's tense posture as he loomed too close. Security guards, who had ignored Amara hours earlier, now stood at stiff attention, uncertain. Amara's tone remained even, her words crisp. The time for that conversation was when you believed I was nobody. She stepped past him with measured grace, her shoulders square, her gaze forward. She didn't raise her voice, didn't rush. She simply moved, and he moved aside. In the lobby, the digital ticker mounted to the wall flashed red. Novadine's stock had fallen 7% in less than 2 hours. Employees clustered in groups, their whispers rippling like static. Who is she? What's happening? Why is the stock tanking? A few typed her name into search bars, their faces shifting as results appeared. Amara Cole, Johnson Capital Partners. Screenshots spread through Slack channels faster than Richard could issue a command. Behind her, his laughter from earlier had curdled into frantic whispers, into calls unanswered, into a storm he had unleashed with his own hand. Amara did not look back. She didn't need to. The momentum had shifted, irreversibly. The test was over. The results were written across the red numbers, bleeding down every screen in the building. The boardroom, just hours after the handshake incident, was no longer filled with laughter. The blinds were drawn shut, the lights dimmed to avoid reflections off the dozen laptop screens displaying the same horror. Novadine's stock graph sloping downward like a cliff. Red numbers pulsed across the screen, each percentage drop heavier than the last. The atmosphere was claustrophobic. Ties loosened, jackets tossed over chairs, water bottles half empty. Richard stood at the head of the table, his voice louder than necessary, as though volume might stop the bleeding. How the hell did no one tell me who she was? His fist slammed the table, rattling pens. It's your job to know every face walking through this building. Instead we sat here treating her like a goddamn HR applicant. His eyes swept the room with fury. The executives shrank back, exchanging silent accusations with their eyes. One finally spoke. Her name was on the calendar as a Cole diversity meeting. You said yourself it wasn't worth a full briefing. Richard's face flushed crimson. Don't you pin this on me. He snapped. You people sit around cashing checks while I carry this company. That woman, he stopped himself, grinding his teeth. She walked in here acting like she belonged, and we played along. Well, she doesn't. She's nothing but a professional agitator. These people make careers out of dragging down men like us. His words carried venom, his disdain for Amara sharpened now that she had the upper hand. At the far end of the table, Graham Porter leaned forward, voice low but urgent. We need to fight back. Dig into her past. Everyone has skeletons. We find hers, we put her on the defensive. Leak something, spin the narrative. If she wants to play hardball, we show her we can hit harder. His tone was the swagger of a man who had survived scandals before, certain that money and dirt could always buy a way out. Several heads nodded reluctantly, but one executive frowned. That's suicide, Graham. Johnson Capital has real weight. If we go after her, it'll blow back twice as hard. Markets don't like vendettas, they like stability. The room divided instantly, some grumbling in agreement with Graham's aggressiveness, others staring at the floor, unwilling to pick a side. Meanwhile, 2 blocks away, inside a nondescript black van outfitted with glowing monitors, Amara's team watched Novadine's collapse unfold in real time. Graphs spiked and dipped as Priya Desai, the CFO of Cole Hartwell Capital, coordinated subtle calls to analysts. We're not making accusations, she reminded her team. We're simply raising concerns. Let the market connect the dots. Beside her, another associate flipped through a leather-bound file, its pages filled with meticulously transcribed notes from Amara's visit, timestamps of slights, details of tone and expression, direct quotes. Every piece of evidence was catalogued, ready to be deployed. Amara sat quietly at the back of the van, watching the graphs with calm detachment. Just signals for now, she said. No announcements. The house of cards needs to tremble on its own. She leaned back, eyes closing briefly, replaying Richard's smirk in her mind. His words, "I don't shake hands with staff," were etched there, not as a wound but as a trigger. This was not revenge, it was consequence, pure and deliberate. Back at Novadine, Richard paced like a caged animal. His phone buzzed with messages from shareholders demanding explanations. He ignored most, but one from a board member flashed across the screen. "Call me. Emergency." He shoved it aside. "It's a damn witch hunt," he muttered. "She's poisoning the water, and you're all just sitting here." His voice rose again, raw anger spilling out. "These people don't build companies, they leech off the ones we create. And now the market panics because one uppity investor plays victim." His words were bitter, laced with the kind of racism he usually reserved for private conversations, but stress had stripped away caution. Elliot, his young assistant, appeared at the door, face pale. "Sir, there's a call you should take." Richard waved him off. "Not now. It's from your largest institutional shareholder, Elliot pressed. Richard cursed and stormed out with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice booming down the hall. Nothing's wrong, it's temporary fluctuation. Don't let the press. The door closed behind him, muting the tirade. The executive sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Graham broke it with a chuckle, though it lacked humor. We've been so busy laughing at her we forgot she could burn us down. His words hung heavy, unchallenged. By late afternoon the whispers had become shouts. Financial news tickers speculated about an unnamed investor walking out of Novodyne headquarters unimpressed. Social media threads dissected screenshots of Amara's profile, her reputation for pulling billions overnight. A single word began circulating: toxic. Richard stormed back into the boardroom, face slick with sweat. We'll issue a press statement. Talk about our commitment to inclusion. Spin the narrative. Get ahead of it. His voice was frantic, but beneath the desperation was the same arrogance. This won't stick, we've beaten worse. But his words were drowned by a new sound: phones pinging simultaneously. Each executive glanced down at their screen. An email had landed in all their inboxes, a calendar invite. Final investment decision meeting, Johnson Capital Partners, tomorrow 9 a.m. The note at the bottom was curt: you may bring one attorney. For the first time that day the room truly fell silent. The men exchanged uneasy glances. This was not gossip, not rumor, not fluctuation. This was the hammer descending. Across town, Amara closed her laptop in the van, satisfied. We've sent the signal, she said. Now let them scramble. Priya looked up. Tomorrow, Amara confirmed. Her voice was steady, her eyes unwavering. The test had moved into its next phase. The morning sun cast a hard white glow across downtown Austin as Richard Hawthorne stepped out of his car. His usual entourage was absent. Only his attorney, a thin man in an immaculate suit, trailed behind, carrying a leather briefcase like a shield. Richard's shoulders were squared, but his face betrayed the strain, dark circles under his eyes, skin tight with anxiety. He had rehearsed apologies all night in his mirror, every word clipped, every phrase massaged to appear contrite without admitting guilt. Yet as he crossed the polished lobby of Cole Hartwell Capital, the nerves leaked through in the twitch of his jaw, the restless flick of his hands. The receptionist, a young black woman in a tailored blazer, looked up at him with professional neutrality. Mr. Hawthorne, Miss Cole will see you shortly. Please wait here. She gestured toward a side seating area. The irony did not escape him, the exact same demotion he had once imposed on Amara in his own lobby. He clenched his jaw but sat, his attorney murmuring at his side. Stay calm, no outbursts. You need them more than they need you. 45 minutes ticked by. Richard shifted in his seat, each minute scraping against his pride. He knew why. This was no accident, it was mirror. The same humiliation he had dished out returned in full measure. By the time Elliot from CHC appeared to escort them, Richard's irritation had bubbled into a simmering rage, though he kept it caged behind a brittle smile. When he entered the boardroom, the scope of the reversal hit him like a blow. This was not the small airless meeting room where he had cornered Amara. This was a vast chamber of glass and oak, the kind of room where real power lived. At the head of the table sat Amara Cole, dressed in a charcoal suit with understated jewelry that whispered wealth without ostentation. Her team flanked her, men and women of every race, sharp-eyed, composed, radiating authority. Worse still, Richard recognized faces that did not belong to Cole Hartwell. Representatives from 3 other major investment firms sat at the table, their presence unmistakable. Together they controlled over $200 billion in capital. Richard faltered mid-step, the realization cutting deep. This was not just Amara, this was an alliance. Mr. Hawthorne, Amara said, her voice cool, not rising to greet him. Please take a seat. Richard tried to reassert control. He forced a smile, his tone oily. Miss Cole, I'd like to begin by expressing my deepest regret for any misunderstandings during your visit yesterday. Novodyne values diversity. This isn't about misunderstandings, Amara cut in. Her tone was precise, clipped, her gaze steady. This is about accountability. Her interruption disarmed him. He cleared his throat, fumbling for composure. I built Novodyne from nothing, he began, his voice rising. We're innovators, job creators. I'm not going to let some outsider. You were being evaluated, Amara said evenly. She opened a folder in front of her, sliding a thick binder across the table toward him. Johnson Capital Partners was considering not just a $2 billion investment in Novodyne, but potentially acquiring your company outright. We've been analyzing your financials, your market position, your product pipeline. Yesterday's visit was the final assessment, a character evaluation of leadership. Richard's hands twitched as he flipped through the binder. His eyes scanned page after page, transcripts of his own words, notes of every delay, every microaggression. Internal communications from former employees, anonymized but damning, emails, performance reviews, promotion statistics that laid bare a pattern of bias. His throat tightened. How the hell did you get this? He demanded, slapping the binder shut. Former employees, Amara replied. NDAs don't apply when speaking to potential investors during due diligence. Your legal department should have advised you of that. One of the other investors leaned forward. Johnson Capital approached us 3 months ago. We're collectively establishing new standards, investment criteria, that include corporate culture assessments. Novodyne was our test case. The color drained from Richard's face. He turned to his attorney, who scribbled frantically on a legal pad, but the words blurred before his eyes. Rage surged through him. This is discrimination, he snapped, his voice cracking. Reverse racism. You're targeting me because I'm a white man in power. You think you can gang up on me, tear down everything I built, because I didn't kiss the ring of some diversity crusade. Amara did not blink. She pressed a button on the remote in front of her. The speakers in the room crackled to life, and then his own voice filled the air. I don't shake hands with staff, followed by the condescending explanations, the dismissals, the mocking tone about cream and sugar. Each phrase, each slight, replayed with clinical precision. The room listened in silence, every word damning. When the recording ended, the silence was heavier than before. Richard's attorney scribbled another note, do not speak, but Richard's fury boiled over. You baited me, he growled. You came in here dressed like some secretary, waiting for us to slip. You wanted to trap me, his face twisted with resentment. You don't belong at this table, you never did. People like me built this industry. People like me built my own table. Amara interrupted, her tone sharper now, the first edge of steel in her voice. She gestured to the executives around her, diverse in gender, race, age. We manage over $50 billion in assets. And the coalition represented here controls more than $200 billion. The question is not whether I belong. The question is whether Novodyne deserves to. Richard's chest heaved, his attorney tugged at his sleeve, whispering frantically, but he shook him off. What do you want? He spat, finally. Amara slid another document across the table. Richard snatched it up, expecting an acquisition offer at a cutthroat price. Instead, his eyes scanned a comprehensive list of demands: removal of the CEO, restructuring of the board, transparent pay scales, blind resume reviews, independent audits of culture, executive bonuses tied directly to diversity metrics. His jaw tightened as he read. This isn't negotiation, Amara said flatly. This is the only path forward, if Novodyne wishes to avoid a complete investor boycott. The room was silent, but for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Richard's hand trembled as he held the paper. For the first time in his career, he was not the one dictating terms. He was the one cornered, the one stripped of power. His eyes darted around the table, searching for support, but found none. The other investors' faces were impassive, resolute. You're going to kill us. Richard muttered, voice low and bitter. You'll tank the company, throw thousands of jobs to the wolves, just to make your point. All because I wouldn't shake your damn hand. Amara leaned forward slightly, her eyes unyielding. No, the market is correcting a distortion. Discrimination has always carried a cost. You just pushed it onto everyone else. We're making sure the bill is paid by those responsible. Richard slammed the document down on the table. You think you're some kind of savior, he sneered. But you're nothing more than a bully with a checkbook. You want to run Novodyne? Fine. See how far you get without men like me who actually know how to build. One of the other investors cleared his throat. Mr. Hawthorne, it seems you don't realize you're already out of time. The board will decide, not you. We're here to ensure they understand the consequences. Richard's attorney leaned in, whispering harshly, "If you keep talking, you'll bury yourself. Sit down and shut up." But Richard could not. His pride, his rage, his disbelief boiled over into one last tirade. "You're a fraud," he snarled at Amara. "A token who got lucky. You don't have the spine to do what it takes. You'll fold when the heat's on. That's why people like me always win." Amara stood, her presence commanding the room. "Yesterday, you told me I was staff. Today you learn who actually signs the checks. This isn't about me, Mr. Hawthorne. It's about every talented person you dismissed, every barrier you maintained. You wanted to know if I had the spine. You're about to find out." The meeting ended not with shouting, but with certainty. Richard slumped in his chair, staring at the demands he could not accept, yet could not refuse. The coalition of investors rose in unison, their message delivered. The board of Novodyne would have its vote. And Richard Hawthorne, for the first time, would not be in the room where the decision was made. The decision came swiftly. On the first day after the investor meeting, Novodyne's board of directors convened in an emergency session. Their expressions were grim, their voices subdued, the weight of billions pressing against them. The vote was unanimous. Richard Hawthorne was removed as CEO effective immediately. The press release was careful, citing leadership inconsistent with company values, but the message was clear. For the first time in its history, Novodyne would be led by someone other than the man who had built it. The CFO, Claire Whitman, was appointed interim CEO, the company's first female leader. The market reacted instantly, stock stabilizing at 15% below its previous value but no longer free-falling. It was the kind of bruised optimism that suggested survival, not collapse. Richard, however, did not take the news with quiet dignity. Storming from the boardroom, he hurled his phone against the wall, the device shattering into pieces. "This is a goddamn coup," he shouted at anyone within earshot. "You let that woman, her dictate terms to us. You're all cowards. You think she gives a damn about this company. She just wants to burn it down because people like her can't build what we've built." His voice was raw, spitting with resentment. Security watched uneasily from the hallway but didn't intervene. They no longer took their orders from him. By the second day, the hammer fell harder. Cole Hartwell Capital forwarded select documentation to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The files were carefully redacted to protect individual privacy, but still devastating: patterns of pay disparities, testimonies of harassment, records of women and minorities systematically stalled in their careers. The EEOC opened a formal investigation. Its announcement splashed across every financial news channel. The market shivered again, but Claire's steady hand and her immediate acknowledgement of the probe reassured investors that Novodyne was at least no longer in denial. On the third day, the dam of silence broke. Former employees, now shielded by the EEOC inquiry, began to speak. Stories surfaced online, women told to smile more in meetings, black engineers whose technical ideas were ignored until repeated by white colleagues, Asian employees mocked for their accents, complaints buried by HR to protect leadership. Hashtags trended, #Novodyne toxic, #break the glass ceiling. Anonymous accounts posted screenshots of performance reviews with coded language, "not a culture fit, too assertive," that cut to the heart of systemic bias. What had once been whispered in hallways was now shouted across the digital square. Richard watched the storm from the sidelines, pacing his mansion like a caged beast. He called former allies, begging for support. "You know me," he barked into the phone. "You know I don't mean half the things they're saying. This is a setup. Some diversities are out for blood." But allies grew scarce. On Bloomberg, an exposé hit like dynamite: Richard's history of discrimination complaints at previous companies, settlements quietly paid, NDAs filed away. A pattern, stretching back decades. His reputation, once gilded, began to tarnish in real time. Meanwhile, inside Novodyne's walls, the company wrestled with its own reckoning. Claire called an emergency leadership summit, her voice steady but somber. "We have three choices," she told the group. "We fight every allegation and lose in court and in the market. We make superficial changes to weather the storm, or we commit to genuine transformation." There's no other way. Her eyes swept across the table. Some directors nodded slowly. Others scowled, resistant. Graham Porter was the loudest. He slammed his palm on the table, face red. This is blackmail, plain and simple. We're letting woke investors dictate how we run our business. We can't bend to this. We fight, or we lose everything. His voice dripped with venom. They want to replace men like us with tokens who check boxes. You give in now, you'll be running bake sales by next year instead of billion-dollar deals. Claire's reply was sharp, her tone cutting through the tension. No, Graham, they're not dictating. They're putting a price on discrimination. For the first time, the market is charging interest on the debt we've carried for years. This isn't politics, this is economics. Across town, Amara and her team maintained a deliberate silence. They monitored developments through multiple channels, noting every board statement, every leak to the press, every tremor in the stock. In their headquarters, screens glowed with metrics, and weekly updates from independent auditors, already embedded at Novodyne, poured in. Priya summarized the reports. They're flailing, she said, but there's movement. Structural changes are on the table. If they resist, we push harder. If they follow through, we recognize progress. Amara listened, her expression unreadable. We're not here to destroy Novodyne, she said finally. Their technology has value, but leadership sets culture. Culture determines who contributes, who benefits. That's what needed disruption. Her words carried both resolve and a flicker of wariness. She knew this was bigger than one company. It was about setting precedent. By the fifth day, the board convened for its most consequential vote. The debate stretched for hours, voices rising, tempers flaring. At one point, Graham stormed out, shouting, "You're all gutless. You'd rather bow to outsiders than defend your own damn company." His words echoed down the corridor, laced with racial venom. Let them run it then. See how far a bunch of diversity hires get, without men who know what they're doing. His tirade was caught on a staffer's phone, and leaked within the hour, fueling the firestorm online. The turning point came when Thomas Chen, a quiet board member, often overlooked, finally spoke. His voice was low, but the room stilled. "My daughter graduated top of her class from MIT in computer science," he said. "She worked at a company like ours for 18 months. Her ideas were credited to male colleagues. She was interrupted in meetings, told to take notes, assigned administrative work despite her role. She left the industry. We lost her brilliance because we created an environment where she could not thrive." His words cut deeper than any shouting. For the first time, the older guard had no rebuttal. The final vote was 11-2. Novodyne would implement all of Johnson Capital's requirements. Transparent pay scales, blind resume reviews, independent cultural audits tied to executive compensation, genuine promotion pathways for underrepresented employees. Not symbolic promises but structural reforms that could not be undone by speeches or press releases. On the seventh day, Novodyne announced its comprehensive overhaul. The public statement was strikingly specific: transparent pay reports to be published quarterly, mentorship programs linked directly to promotions, outside experts brought in to reset company culture. Most critically, executive bonuses would be tied to the results of diversity audits. For once, progress had teeth. The tech industry watched with shock. CEOs called emergency meetings to examine their own vulnerabilities. Venture firms began rewriting due diligence checklists to include cultural assessments. What had once been treated as HR fluff was suddenly a financial imperative. Across social media, debates raged. Was this genuine reform or coerced compliance? Either way, the ripple effect had begun. Richard, meanwhile, seethed in exile. In interviews he painted himself as a martyr. "This is what happens when you don't bow to the mob," he told one sympathetic podcaster. "They destroy real builders and replace us with figureheads. Woke capitalism is cancer." But the words rang hollow. Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal and CNBC dissected his record piece by piece, each headline tightening the vice. Allies distanced themselves. Former friends stopped returning his calls. He had become radioactive. Inside Novodyne, resistance still simmered. Some executives resigned rather than adapt. Others grumbled privately but adjusted when they realized the changes were non-negotiable. Anonymous feedback channels revealed skepticism, even resentment, but also a growing sense of relief. Employees who had felt invisible for years now glimpsed a future where their contributions might matter. Cautious optimism began to bloom in the cracks left by Richard's downfall. By the end of the week the story had crystallized. This was not just about one man's arrogance or one firm's intervention. It was about systemic cost finally coming due. Novodyne had been the test case, but every company watching knew if discrimination carried a financial price here, it would carry one everywhere. The federal courthouse in Austin was buzzing by the time Richard Hawthorne arrived for his hearing. Journalists crowded the marble steps, microphones raised, cameras flashing. Former Novodyne employees huddled together near the entrance, their expressions a mix of nervous anticipation and steely resolve. Among the audience, slipping into the back row of the hearing chamber, was Amara Cole, her presence quiet but unmistakable. She was not here to grandstand, she was here to witness. The proceedings began with a low hum of tension. The lead attorney for the plaintiffs rose first, outlining a consolidated class action against Richard and Novodyne's former leadership. "This is not one man misspeaking in frustration," she said, her tone steady but cutting. "This is a documented, deliberate pattern of discriminatory practices spanning decades. What happened last week was not an accident, it was a symptom of a culture he cultivated and enforced." Richard's lawyer countered with smooth precision. "Mr. Hawthorne is a traditionalist, not a criminal. He led his company to unprecedented growth. He maintained a meritocratic environment where only the most qualified advanced. If certain groups were underrepresented, perhaps we should question their qualifications rather than presume bias." The words echoed Richard's own talking points, dressed up in legal polish. When Richard himself took the stand, his confidence re-emerged like a mask. He straightened his suit jacket, looked directly at the panel, and spoke with practiced authority. "I've always believed in fairness," he began. "I've always treated people according to merit. If some didn't rise, it's because they didn't have what it takes. I don't apologize for setting high standards. That's how you build a billion-dollar company." His tone dripped with disdain at the last phrase, as though reminding everyone that he alone had achieved what others only dreamed of. But the cross-examination cut through his performance. The plaintiff's attorney displayed internal emails on the screen, messages where Richard instructed recruiters to prioritize culture fit, coded language for white male candidates, performance reviews showing women consistently marked lower for assertiveness while men were praised for leadership, promotion statistics revealing that over 5 years not a single Black or Latino employee had been elevated into senior leadership despite comparable qualifications. Richard shifted in his chair, jaw tightening. "I never wrote those emails," he barked. "They were staff interpretations. My words were taken out of context." The attorney pressed. "So when you said, and I quote, 'We're not running a charity, hire people who belong in the room, not ones who just tick boxes,' what exactly did you mean?" Richard snapped. "I meant what I said. This industry was built by men like me, men who know how to work, not people looking for handouts because of skin color or gender. You twist that into racism because it suits your agenda." His voice rose, raw, exposing what the polished arguments of his lawyer could no longer cover. The turning point came when Jessica Tran, Richard's former executive assistant, took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with each sentence. "Mr. Hawthorne had explicit protocols for visitors. Important visitors were given VIP treatment. Those he considered unimportant were sent to side seating, made to wait, or placed in small meeting rooms. When Miss Cole's visit was scheduled, he told me directly, 'She's a diversity obligation, not a real investor. Treat it accordingly.'" Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Richard leaned forward, his face contorting. "She was a diversity obligation," he shouted before his lawyer could stop him. "She came in here looking like a secretary, waiting for us to slip, and we did what we always do. We kept her in her place. That's business. That's how the world works. Some people deserve the handshake, staff doesn't." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Even his lawyer slumped back, defeated. The courtroom went utterly silent, except for the scratching of pens on paper as reporters captured every word. In the back row, Amara's expression did not change. Her gaze remained calm, almost sorrowful, as if watching a man unravel under the weight of his own arrogance. After 3 days of testimony, the committee delivered its findings. Richard Hawthorne had personally violated multiple anti-discrimination statutes. The penalties were severe: a 10-year industry disbarment, preventing him from serving as an officer in any public company, significant financial penalties, and mandatory disclosure of his discrimination history to any future employers or business partners. It was the corporate equivalent of exile. As the hearing adjourned, Richard's shoulders slumped, his swagger gone. Outside in the marble hallway, he came face to face with Amara. For a long moment they regarded one another in silence. His voice, when it finally emerged, was low and venomous. "You destroyed everything I built." Amara's reply was quiet but unflinching. "You built something that should never have existed. A culture that excluded talent because of what they looked like instead of what they could contribute. That wasn't strength, it was fragility, hiding under power. You had no right," he hissed, eyes narrowing. "I had every right," she said calmly. "You used your power to diminish. I used mine to hold you accountable. The difference matters." Before Richard could reply, a ripple of voices spread down the hallway. Reporters were reading alerts off their phones. Novodyne stock back to pre-scandal levels, one murmured. Another added, "Under Whitman's leadership, analysts projecting growth again." A journalist called out, "Mr. Hawthorne, does this disprove your claim that diversity initiatives would damage the company's market position?" The cameras turned on him. For the first time Richard had no answer. He pushed past them in silence, the narrative he had clung to collapsing under the weight of the market itself. Back inside the courthouse, Amara stood quietly by the window, watching the city move beyond the glass. She felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction. This was not about destroying a man. It was about shifting the system that had enabled him. Yet she knew there were dozens more Richard Hawthornes still sitting at boardroom tables, their biases unchallenged, their power intact. This was only one battle in a longer war. Still, as she left the courthouse, the symbolic resonance was undeniable. The market had delivered its verdict. Inclusion was not charity, it was strength, and exclusion for the first time carried a measurable cost. 1 year later, the Grand Hyatt ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, its seats filled to capacity for the Financial Innovation Summit. Reporters jostled at the back, investors leaned forward at the tables, and the stage lights illuminated a panel titled in bold letters, "Inclusive Investment Standards, the New Market Imperative." At the center sat Amara Cole, calm and composed, flanked by Novodyne's newly confirmed CEO Claire Whitman, and representatives from major firms who had joined the coalition. The moderator wasted no time. "Miss Cole, 1 year ago Novodyne faced near collapse after discriminatory practices came to light. Today they're outperforming market averages by 12%. Did you anticipate this outcome when you withdrew your potential investment?" Amara's response was steady. "This was never about punishing one company," she said. "It was about proving a point too long ignored, that exclusion isn't just unethical, it's inefficient. Markets know how to price assets, but they've failed to price culture. Now we've corrected that distortion." The audience erupted in applause. Claire leaned toward the microphone, her voice confident. "Initially we adopted these standards to survive, now we see them as a competitive edge. Our recruiting costs dropped 22%, retention improved, and applications from underrepresented groups doubled. Inclusion isn't charity, it's smart business." A slide appeared on the screen, showing adoption rates. 12 major firms had fully implemented the standards, 30 more were in process. The numbers spoke for themselves. Meanwhile, Richard Hawthorne's attempted comeback faltered. His new venture, a cryptocurrency exchange marketed to traditional values investors, collapsed under the weight of mandatory disclosure rules. Every potential backer Googled his name, saw the hearing transcripts, and backed away. Despite his furious rants on podcasts about woke capitalism, the market judged him too risky. His influence, once towering, had withered to irrelevance. Back at Cole Hartwell Capital, Amara's empire expanded. Assets under management had risen to $75 billion, fueled by investor demand for her firm's rigorous culture metrics. But her greatest pride wasn't the money, it was the wall inside the headquarters lobby, engraved with the words "Capital is power, power requires responsibility." Employees passed it each morning as a reminder that returns and values were not separate pursuits but bound together. That afternoon, Amara hosted a mentoring session with 6 young women of color entering finance. They gathered in a lounge corner rather than a boardroom, the space filled with natural light and comfortable chairs. The conversation was candid: market trends, leadership pitfalls, survival strategies. One young analyst finally asked the question that lingered in all their minds: "How did you keep your composure during the Novodyne incident?" "I would have lost my temper at the first insult." Amara smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both weariness and pride. "Because I knew every slight was data. Every interruption, every assumption was proof of what needed to change. If I reacted with anger, they'd dismiss me as emotional. By staying steady, I turned their own words into evidence. That's how you win the long game." The women listened, nodding, their faces lit by the fire of possibility. Amara glanced around the circle, remembering her own early years working nights while male peers advanced through golf outings, being mistaken for staff in firms she helped make profitable, building her company from nothing while doubted at every turn. "I didn't build this firm just to make money," she said. "I built it to change who has power, and how they use it." A week later, Amara sat across from the CEO of a pharmaceutical company seeking major investment. He presented not only financial projections, but also transparent pay data, promotion pathways and diversity statistics. His female chief science officer spoke freely, interrupting him without hesitation, her authority respected. Amara observed quietly, then extended her hand with a genuine smile. "Now this," she said, "is a company I'd be proud to invest in." For her the lesson was simple but profound: true power is not measured by who you can refuse to acknowledge, but by who you choose to elevate. The legacy of Novodyne was not its collapse, but its transformation, a warning and a promise to every boardroom still blind to the cost of exclusion. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.